I still remember the sound of the front door unlocking. Not because I was standing inside the house. Because I was standing across the street, holding 2 grocery bags, watching another woman use a key that only my husband and I were supposed to have. She didn't hesitate. She didn't knock. She opened the door as if she had lived there for years. A little girl, about 14, ran past her carrying a backpack with bright blue straps. Then I heard a voice I had once spent 7 years trying to forget. "Emma, don't leave your shoes in the hallway." My husband, Daniel, he wasn't surprised she was there. He wasn't asking why she had a key. He sounded comfortable. Like this had already become normal. I stood frozen beside my rental car, my fingers slowly loosening around the grocery bags until 1 carton of eggs slipped onto the sidewalk and shattered. Neither of them heard it. Neither of them looked outside. The neighborhood where we had spent almost 3 years building a life together had become a place where I no longer belonged. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 53 years old. For 26 years, I worked as a senior procurement manager for one of the largest medical equipment manufacturers in our state. I negotiated contracts worth more than $80 million, supervised 34 employees, and built a reputation for noticing details everyone else ignored. People often said I had an impossible memory. I remembered invoice numbers, serial numbers, signatures, tiny inconsistencies. It was the reason I succeeded professionally. It was also the reason my husband never realized he had already lost. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and the city you're watching from in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how many different places these stories reach. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss another story. When people hear that my husband secretly moved his ex-wife into our home, they usually imagine years of screaming arguments and obvious warning signs. Life rarely works that way. Most betrayals arrive quietly. Daniel and I met when I was 46. He was 48. We met during a charity fundraiser for a children's hospital. He wasn't especially charming. He wasn't wealthy. He simply seemed tired in a way I understood. Both of us had already lived enough life to know that perfection wasn't real. He had been divorced for 9 years. His ex-wife, Melissa, had primary custody of their daughter, Emma. He described the divorce as painful but civilized. "They're my family," he told me on our 4th date, "just not my future." At the time, I believed him. Looking back, I realize he always chose his words carefully enough to avoid technically lying. That became a pattern. I grew up in a small town where my father repaired farm equipment, and my mother worked double shifts at a nursing home. We never had much money. Our first family car cost $800 and needed to be pushed down the driveway every winter before it would start. My parents believed that if something broke, you repaired it. If someone disappointed you, you gave them another chance. If you made a promise, you kept it. When I was 11, my father handed me a rusted toolbox. "It's yours now." Every tool inside had scratches from years of use. I asked why he wasn't buying me a new one. He smiled. "The newest tool isn't always the best one, the one that lasts is." That sentence stayed with me my entire life. Maybe that's why I stayed in relationships longer than I should have. I believed people could be repaired. Daniel admired that about me. Or at least he said he did. The first year of our marriage felt ordinary. Peaceful. We combined our savings to purchase a beautiful 4-bedroom home just outside the city. The purchase price was $682,000. We each contributed exactly $170,000 toward the down payment. The mortgage came from our joint income. Every payment left our shared account. Everything was documented. Everything. At least that's what I thought. Emma visited every other weekend. She was polite, quiet, loved photography. She and I never became especially close, but we respected each other. Melissa occasionally came to pick Emma up. She never entered the house. She remained in the driveway. Always smiling. Always pleasant. Too pleasant. I didn't understand that then. I do now. People often mistake politeness for honesty. The two have very little in common. Daniel's younger sister, Rebecca, adored Melissa. She claimed it was for Emma's sake. Maybe part of that was true. Rebecca hated conflict. She solved every uncomfortable situation by pretending everyone already agreed. If Daniel forgot our anniversary, she'd tell me he was simply overwhelmed. If Melissa called during dinner, Rebecca insisted co-parenting required sacrifice. Nothing was ever anyone's fault. Everything was just understandable. Understanding can become dangerous when it excuses everything. Then my mother got sick. Very sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors estimated 8 to 10 months. She survived only 6. I temporarily moved into her small house almost 300 miles away. Every morning began at 5:45. Medication. Breakfast. Doctor appointments. Insurance calls. Physical therapy. Laundry. Cleaning. More medication. Daniel visited twice. Both visits lasted less than 24 hours. I wish I could stay longer, he always said. Work is impossible right now. I believed him because I was too exhausted to question anything. Every evening he called around 9. He asked about Mom. Asked whether I was eating enough. Asked when I thought I'd come home. Sometimes Emma's voice appeared briefly in the background. Sometimes television. Sometimes silence. Nothing sounded unusual. Months later, I realized what I never heard. Construction noise. Moving furniture. Different voices. He always called from the same room. The garage. I discovered that from phone records much later. At the time, I simply appreciated his consistency. The week before my mother passed away, Daniel said something that seemed harmless. I've been helping Melissa more lately. I thanked him. I actually thanked him. Emma probably needs stability while I'm gone. He answered immediately. Exactly. Such a small conversation. Such an enormous lie. After my mother's funeral, I stayed another 10 days handling paperwork, selling her old car, organizing medical bills, and meeting with the attorney. Daniel encouraged me not to rush. Take all the time you need. Most husbands would have wanted their wives home. Mine wanted the house to himself. I didn't understand why until much later. The morning I finally drove back, I imagined everything would begin feeling normal again. I stopped to buy groceries because Daniel always forgot breakfast food. Orange juice. Eggs. Coffee. His favorite cinnamon bread. Little routines matter after loss. They remind you that life still exists. When I reached our neighborhood, I noticed 2 unfamiliar bicycles leaning against our garage. Children's bicycles. Emma only owned one. Then I saw flower pots I had never purchased. Curtains that weren't mine. A welcome mat with handwriting I didn't recognize. Tiny details. Tiny details that most people ignore. I parked across the street because another SUV occupied my usual place. Melissa's SUV. That's when I watched her unlock my front door. Everything after that happened without emotion. People expect rage. I felt something colder. Observation. The same feeling I had during difficult contract negotiations. When emotions become expensive, details become valuable. I remained inside my car for almost 20 minutes. Nobody came outside. Nobody looked for me. Eventually, Daniel stepped onto the porch holding a coffee mug. He laughed at something Melissa said. Emma followed carrying folded laundry. Folded laundry. Inside my house. inside the home we had chosen together. Then Daniel casually wrapped an arm around Melissa's shoulders. Not romantically. Comfortably. Like someone returning to an old habit. That single movement told me more than any confession ever could. I quietly started my engine. I drove to a nearby hotel. I checked into room 214. That evening Daniel called. "Hey sweetheart, how far away are you?" I looked out the hotel window toward the parking lot. "I'm close. Drive safely." His voice never trembled. He asked if I had eaten. He told me he missed me. He ended the call with, "I love you." Then he walked back into the house where his ex-wife was already living. I slept exactly 93 minutes that night. Not because I was heartbroken. Because my mind kept replaying one strange image. The welcome mat. I knew I had thrown away our old one before leaving to care for my mother. Daniel hated shopping. He would never have replaced it himself. Melissa had. Someone only replaces a welcome mat when they expect to stay. The next morning I returned before sunrise. I parked farther away. The kitchen lights came on at 6:12. Melissa prepared breakfast. Daniel packed Emma's school lunch. They moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't an emergency arrangement. This had become their daily life. Then, just as Emma left for school, I noticed something almost invisible through the dining room window. A stack of mail sitting beside the fruit bowl. Most of it was junk. One envelope wasn't. It was addressed in Daniel's handwriting. To Melissa. At our address. And in the upper right corner, where people usually place a return address. I noticed one tiny detail that made every piece of the puzzle begin falling into place. The envelope stayed on that table for less than 30 seconds. Melissa picked it up, slipped it into her purse and walked toward the hallway. Most people would have focused on the hug Daniel gave her before she left. I focused on the envelope. Not because of the name. Because of the date. The postmark was almost 5 months old. 5 months. That meant Melissa had been receiving mail at our address while my mother was still alive. While I was sleeping in a hospital chair, believing my husband was spending lonely evenings in the house we had built together. I waited until everyone left. Daniel drove to work at exactly 7:41. Melissa followed 12 minutes later. The house became quiet. For the first time in months, I unlocked my own front door. The key still worked. That surprised me more than anything. I stepped inside slowly. The smell hit me first. Not perfume. Vanilla candles. Melissa always burned vanilla candles. I knew because Emma had once mentioned that her mother bought them in bulk every autumn. Our living room looked familiar until I started noticing the details. The framed photograph of Daniel and me from our anniversary trip had disappeared. The picture hooks remained. The photograph did not. The blue throw blanket my sister had knitted for us was folded inside a storage basket. In its place sat a cream-colored blanket embroidered with the initials, MJ. Melissa Jane. Our kitchen had changed too. Different coffee mugs. Different fruit bowl. Different curtains. None of the changes were dramatic. They were quiet. The kind of changes people make when they don't think the original owner is coming back. I walked upstairs. Our bedroom door stood open. Half of my clothes were gone. Not donated. Not thrown away. Packed. Every box had my handwriting from our move 3 years earlier. Daniel had carefully packed my belongings into the same moving boxes we had once used together. He hadn't acted in anger. He had planned this. One closet now contained Melissa's dresses. Shoes lined neatly beneath them. A jewelry box rested where mine used to sit. There is something uniquely painful about seeing another woman's ordinary belongings occupying spaces that once held your everyday life. Not because of the objects. Because they represent decisions made over weeks. Maybe months. No single moment destroys a marriage. Thousands of small decisions do. I opened the bathroom cabinet. My shampoo was gone. My toothbrush was gone. Even the face cream I had been using for nearly 10 years had disappeared. Someone had erased me carefully, methodically, without rushing. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry. Not loudly. Just enough to acknowledge that the life I thought I had was already over. 10 minutes later, I stood up and wiped my face. Then I started looking. Professionally. Methodically. Exactly the way I had spent decades reviewing procurement files. People lie. Paper rarely does. The Home Office had always been my responsibility. Daniel hated organizing documents. Every tax return. Every insurance policy. Every mortgage statement. Every warranty. I handled all of it. Or at least I had. The filing cabinet looked untouched. Until I opened the mortgage folder. The papers were there. Mostly. One document was missing. The original property deed. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people would never notice. I noticed immediately because I had arranged every folder alphabetically and chronologically. A missing page leaves a space. Spaces tell stories. I checked the safe. The code still worked. Inside were passports, birth certificates, investment statements, cash, but one folder labeled Property Originals had disappeared. Daniel had removed only the documents connected to the house. Nothing else. Why, if he believed he owned everything now, why hide paperwork? People hide only what can contradict them. I took photographs of every drawer, every closet, every room, every box containing my belongings. Then I noticed another small detail. A receipt sticking halfway out of the office trash can. Most people would have ignored it. I picked it up. It was from a local office supply store. 3 heavy-duty storage boxes. Permanent markers. Packing tape. Purchased 4 months earlier. 4 months. The exact week my mother's condition suddenly worsened. Daniel hadn't packed my things after I stayed away longer than expected. He had begun packing them almost immediately after I left. That realization hurt more than finding Melissa's clothes. Planning always hurts more than impulse. As I left the office, I heard a car door outside. I looked through the blinds. Rebecca, Daniel's sister. She walked toward the front door carrying a casserole dish. I quietly slipped into the laundry room and watched through the side window. Rebecca entered without knocking. Another key. Another person with unrestricted access to my home. I listened. I brought lunch, she called. No answer. The house was empty. She laughed softly. They're probably running errands. She placed the dish in the refrigerator. Then she noticed one of my packed boxes in the hallway. She sighed. I still wish Claire hadn't abandoned everyone like this. Abandoned. The word landed harder than anything else. Not betrayed. Not divorced. Abandoned. That meant Daniel had already created the story. People weren't asking where I was. They believed they already knew. Rebecca continued talking to herself while putting groceries away. I told Daniel she'd eventually choose her mother over her marriage. She genuinely believed it. There was no malice in her voice. Only certainty. Daniel hadn't simply lied. He had given everyone a version of events that made emotional sense. Those lies are the hardest to challenge. Because people don't defend facts. They defend stories. I waited until Rebecca left before slipping out again. Back at the hotel, I spread every photograph across the bed. Living room. bedroom, office, kitchen, boxes, closets, receipts. One image kept drawing my attention. The dining room table. Not because of the mail. Because of a small leather planner lying beside it. Daniel never used planners. He kept everything on his phone. Melissa loved handwritten calendars, which meant she had been managing appointments from inside my dining room. Comfortable enough to leave personal belongings everywhere. Comfort comes from time. Not days. Months. I called my friend Natalie that afternoon. We had worked together for 19 years. She answered on the second ring. Claire, are you home? No. A long silence followed. Then she asked the question only someone who truly knows you would ask. What happened? Not are you okay? Not where are you? Simply, what happened? I told her everything. Not dramatically. Just fact. When I finished, she remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally she said, you already noticed something, didn't you? I smiled despite myself. You know me too well. What is it? I don't know yet. But there's something. There always is. Natalie had watched me solve million-dollar supplier disputes by finding one incorrect signature buried inside hundreds of pages. She trusted my instincts. So what's your plan? I'm not confronting him. Really. If I confront him now, he'll destroy whatever he's trying to hide. And if you wait, I'll find it first. She exhaled slowly. Claire. Yes. I'm very sorry this happened. Those were the first genuine words of comfort anyone had given me since my mother died. I thanked her. Then I hung up. That evening my phone rang. Daniel. I answered immediately. Hey, he said warmly. You still driving? No. Where are you? Resting. Good. He sounded almost relieved. I've been thinking. About what? When you come back, maybe we should talk. I looked at the photographs spread across my hotel bed. I think that's a good idea. He chuckled. I knew you'd understand. Understand what? That he had replaced me. That he had rewritten our marriage while I was helping my dying mother. People often reveal themselves through confidence. Daniel believed his story was complete. He didn't know I had already stepped inside the house. He didn't know I had photographs. He didn't know about the receipt. Or the missing deed. Or the envelope. Most importantly, he didn't know that during our home purchase 3 years earlier, I had insisted on one tiny legal precaution that he barely remembered signing because, at the time, he had laughed and called it another one of Claire's unnecessary details. That forgotten detail had been sitting quietly inside a county records office ever since. And before speaking another word to my husband, I intended to find out whether it was about to become the most expensive mistake he had ever made. The next morning I left the hotel before sunrise. For nearly 30 years I had developed one habit that never disappeared. When something mattered, I arrived before everyone else. Law offices, corporate meetings, hospitals, county buildings. People who arrive early usually find answers before anyone realizes questions are being asked. The county recorder's office opened at 8 o'clock. I was sitting on a bench outside at 7:18 with a notebook, a bottle of water, and a folder containing every copy of our original purchase documents that I had kept in my personal records. Daniel used to tease me for keeping duplicates. You'd survive the apocalypse with paperwork, he once laughed. Maybe. But paperwork has a remarkable habit of surviving people who lie. At exactly 8:01 my number was called. A woman with silver glasses smiled politely. How can I help you today? I need certified copies of every filing connected to my property over the last 5 years. She asked for the address. Typed for a few seconds. Then stopped. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not alarm. Curiosity. There have been several filings. May I see them? She nodded. Of course. She disappeared into the records room. Those 7 minutes felt longer than the 6 months I had spent watching my mother slowly disappear. When she returned, she placed a stack of documents on the counter. There you are. I thanked her and carried everything to a reading table near the window. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Purchase agreement. Mortgage registration. Tax assessment. Insurance notices. Then came something I had never seen before. A document requesting a change in mailing address for property correspondence. Filed 4 months earlier. Submitted only 3 weeks after I had left to care for my mother. The new mailing address remained our home. But the listed contact person had changed. From Claire Thompson. To Daniel Thompson. Only Daniel's. No explanation. No signature from me. No authorization attached. That alone wasn't enough to prove fraud. Spouses often handled administrative updates. But it established something important. He had begun separating me from the property's paperwork almost immediately after I left. Then I reached the document underneath. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Not because it was complicated. Because it was incomplete. Someone had prepared paperwork attempting to transfer ownership into a family trust. The trust listed Daniel as trustee, Emma as beneficiary. My name appeared nowhere. The filing had never been completed. Across the final page, stamped in bold red letters, were 2 words. Rejected. The county had refused to record it. Reason. Missing required signatures. Mind. I closed my eyes. Not from relief. From understanding. Daniel hadn't simply planned to replace me inside the house. He had planned to replace me on paper too. And he had failed. Not because he changed his mind. Because bureaucracy refused to cooperate. Sometimes justice wears a very boring uniform. I requested certified copies of everything. The clerk handed them over. If you don't mind my asking. I looked up. Yes. Is everything all right? I smiled politely. It will be. For the first time since my mother's funeral. I truly believed that. Outside, I called an attorney whose name had been recommended years earlier by one of our company's corporate lawyers. Margaret Ellis. 62 years old. Calm reputation. Specialized in property and financial disputes. Her receptionist found an opening that afternoon after a cancellation. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from Margaret inside an office lined with legal books older than I was. She spent almost 20 minutes reading silently. She never interrupted. Never rushed. When she finally looked up, her first sentence surprised me. You organize documents exceptionally well. I laughed quietly. I've been told that before. She tapped the rejected filing. He tried. Yes. He failed. Yes. She folded her hands. Do you want revenge or resolution? It was an interesting question. Most people think they're the same thing. They're not. I want the truth. And after that, I want whatever follows naturally. She nodded. Good answer. She continued reviewing every page. Finally, she pointed toward one document from our original purchase. What made you include this clause? I smiled for the first time in days. There it is. She looked amused. You knew. I remembered signing something most couples ignore. 3 years earlier, during the home purchase, our attorney had suggested a simple occupancy agreement attached to the ownership documents. It stated that neither owner could permanently grant residency rights to another adult without written consent from the other owner. Daniel had rolled his eyes. It's unnecessary. I had shrugged. If it's unnecessary, signing it costs nothing. He signed. Forgot about it within minutes. I never did. Margaret leaned back slowly. This changes everything. It does. He didn't merely move someone into the house. He violated a signed agreement. She nodded. Potentially several agreements. Quietly, professionally, almost casually. My husband had stepped onto legal ground much weaker than he realized. Margaret didn't smile. Lawyers rarely celebrate early. But I noticed something in her expression. Confidence. We're not sending letters yet, she said. Why not? Because people who believe they're winning make mistakes. That sounded familiar. Corporate negotiations had taught me exactly the same lesson. She continued. I'd like to know how many other representations he's made. What do you mean? If he's been telling banks, neighbors, family members, or government offices that you've abandoned the marriage. She let the sentence finish itself. The implications were obvious. Lies spread. The more places they reach, the harder they become to keep consistent. She assigned an investigator from her office to quietly collect public information. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. Property records. Public filings. Social media. Neighborhood observations. People often document their own dishonesty without realizing it. Before leaving, Margaret handed me a business card. One sentence was written across the back. Never interrupt someone while they're creating evidence. I slipped it into my wallet. That evening, Daniel called again. Still resting? Yes. Good. He sounded cheerful. Almost relaxed. I've been thinking maybe we should have dinner when you get back. I'd like that. Great. There was a pause. Then he asked casually, have you talked to anyone from the neighborhood? Interesting. Not. How are you? Not. When are you coming home? His concern wasn't me. It was information. No. Good. Another tiny word. Another tiny mistake. Good. Why would it be good if I hadn't spoken to anyone? Unless he feared different stories colliding. We talked another 5 minutes. Weather. Traffic. My mother's memorial service. Normal conversation. Except nothing about our marriage was normal anymore. After hanging up, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. He isn't checking on me. He's checking on his story. The investigator called 2 days later. His name was Thomas. Former insurance investigator. Very precise. I have something you should see. We met at a quiet cafe. He handed me a folder. Inside were printed screenshots from neighborhood social media groups. Community barbecues. Holiday decorations. Charity events. Photographs. Lots of photographs. My stomach tightened. Daniel appeared in almost every one. So did Melissa. And Emma. Standing on our porch. Planting flowers. Hosting neighbors. Attending block parties. One caption read, "So happy Daniel finally has his family back together after everything he's been through." Another comment underneath said, "Claire leaving must have been heartbreaking." Daniel had replied with a simple broken heart emoji. Nothing more. He never corrected anyone. He didn't have to. Silence can be the most effective lie of all. Then Thomas slid one final photograph across the table. It had been taken almost 4 months earlier. The date stamp matched the week my mother entered hospice care. Daniel and Melissa were repainting our front door together. Both smiling. Both wearing old clothes covered in paint. Working side by side. Like homeowners. Like partners. While I sat beside my dying mother holding her hand during her final days. Thomas spoke gently. There's one more thing. I looked up. We interviewed no one. You what? I simply observed. He pointed to another page. A delivery log. Furniture deliveries. Appliance installation. Window treatments. Every delivery occurred during the months I was away. Every invoice was signed by Melissa, using my address, using my home, using a confidence that only comes from believing no one will ever return. I closed the folder slowly. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Finally I asked, "Do you think they planned this together?" Thomas considered the question carefully. I think. He paused. People rarely invent an entirely new life in 4 months. That answer stayed with me long after we left the cafe. I drove for almost an hour without turning on the radio. Silence had become easier to understand than music. Every traffic light gave me another minute to think. Not about Daniel. About patterns. During my career, I had investigated vendors who falsified invoices. Very few started with million-dollar fraud. They started by changing something small. One number. One date. One signature. When nobody noticed, they became bolder. Looking back at my marriage, I realized Daniel had followed the same pattern. Tiny omissions. Tiny half-truths. Tiny explanations that sounded reasonable on their own. By the time the biggest lie appeared, it rested on hundreds of smaller ones. That evening, I opened a storage box containing old photo albums. I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for timelines. There is a difference. Memory is emotional. A timeline is factual. Our first vacation. Emma's 13th birthday. The day we received the keys to the house. Christmas dinners. Neighborhood parties. At first everything looked exactly as I remembered. Then I noticed something strange. Melissa appeared more often than I had realized. Never in the center of the photographs. Always nearby. School events. Community fundraisers. Emma's piano recital. At the time, I had thought it was healthy co-parenting. Now I wondered whether Daniel had been slowly rebuilding something I never recognized. The phone rang. It was Natalie. Any news? I met with the investigator. And I told her everything. When I finished, she sighed. I don't know how you've stayed so calm. I don't feel calm. You sound calm. I've learned something. What? When people panic, they stop observing. She laughed softly. You really are impossible. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Before hanging up, she asked one question. If Daniel apologized tomorrow, genuinely apologized, could you forgive him? I looked out the hotel window. A little boy was teaching his younger sister how to ride a bicycle. Every few seconds, he reached out to steady her. Trust looked so simple when it was genuine. Finally, I answered. I could forgive him. You could. Yes. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild truth. Natalie didn't reply immediately. I think that's the healthiest thing you've said all week. Maybe she was right. Forgiveness belongs to the person who was hurt. Trust belongs to both people. One person cannot rebuild it alone. The following morning, Margaret called. I've received another document. What kind of document? It came through a public records request. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. I'd rather show you in person. Half an hour later, I sat across from her desk again. She slid a single sheet toward me. An emergency contact update. Submitted by Daniel to his employer. Primary emergency contact. Melissa Carter. Relationship. Spouse. I read it twice. Then a third time. That's impossible. It is inaccurate. He listed her as his spouse. Yes. We were still legally married. Yes. Margaret folded her hands. People become careless when they repeat a lie often enough. I stared at the paper. This wasn't for friends. No. This wasn't for neighbors. No. This was an official employment record. She nodded once. That matters. It mattered because official forms carry consequences. They aren't casual conversations. They're signed statements. Margaret continued. My investigator also discovered something else. She opened another folder. Inside were copies of utility account changes. Electricity. Internet. Home security system. Each account listed Daniel as the primary holder. That wasn't unusual. What mattered was the secondary contact. Melissa. Not me. Every update occurred while I was caring for my mother. One by one. He had been replacing me everywhere. Quietly. Methodically. Exactly as he had packed my clothes. I felt sadness. But underneath it, something unexpected. Relief. Not because of what he had done. Because every new document removed another ounce of self-doubt. For days I had wondered whether I had somehow misunderstood. Whether grief had clouded my judgment. Paper doesn't grieve. Paper simply records. Margaret leaned forward. I think he's preparing for something. What? I'm not certain yet. She paused. But I don't think moving Melissa into the house was his final step. Those words stayed with me. His final step. If that wasn't the end of his plan, what was? The answer arrived sooner than either of us expected. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. The first message she had sent me in nearly 2 months. Claire, I hope you're okay. Daniel says you've decided not to come home. I don't know what's happening, but if that's true, I wish you'd at least tell him yourself. I read it 5 times. Then I smiled. Not because it was funny. Because Rebecca had unknowingly confirmed exactly what I needed. Daniel wasn't simply letting people assume I had left. He was actively telling them I had chosen not to return. The story was evolving. Which meant he was still adding details. People who keep expanding lies eventually contradict themselves. I showed Margaret the message. She nodded thoughtfully. Don't answer. I wasn't planning to. Good. Why? Every unanswered message encourages people to keep talking. And talking creates records. She smiled. Exactly. For the next week, I remained invisible. No calls to Daniel. No social media. No public confrontation. Meanwhile, Daniel continued living the life he believed he had successfully created. Birthday dinners. Neighborhood walks. Weekend gardening. Pictures appeared online almost daily. Always the same image. Daniel, Melissa, Emma, standing in front of my house. Looking like a perfectly ordinary family. They looked happy. Maybe they were. But happiness built on deception has an unusual weakness. It depends on everyone believing the same version of the past. The moment one verified fact enters the room, the illusion starts collapsing under its own weight. Late Friday afternoon, Margaret called again. This is the one we've been waiting for. What happened? I think your husband just made the biggest mistake of all. I grabbed my keys immediately. When I arrived, she placed a freshly printed document on the desk. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from the bank. It was from a local real estate listing service. Daniel had quietly contacted an agent. Not to buy. To sell. Our house. Without telling me. Without the legal authority to complete the sale on his own. And in the confidential notes attached to the listing request, he had written one sentence that would become impossible to explain away. Property occupied by owner and spouse. Former co-owner permanently relocated and has no further interest in residence. Former co-owner. He hadn't just lied to family. He hadn't just lied to neighbors. He had put that lie into a professional transaction. Margaret looked at me and closed the folder. Now, she said quietly, he's created a paper trail that even he can't easily rewrite. I looked down at the page one last time. For months, Daniel had believed he was erasing me from our life. He never realized that every document he signed was preserving the truth instead. Margaret didn't celebrate. She didn't say, "We have him." She simply reached for a legal pad and wrote 3 dates in a neat column. The day I left to care for my mother. The day Daniel filed the change of mailing information. The day he contacted the real estate agent. Then she drew a straight line connecting them. People think courts care about emotions, she said. They care about timelines. I stared at the page. Everything fit. Not perfectly, but consistently. That was enough. When do we confront him? I asked. We don't. I looked up. We let him confront reality. She explained that our first filing would not accuse Daniel of anything dramatic. No emotional language. No theatrical claims. Just fact. A request preventing any sale or transfer of the property until ownership issues were resolved. Simple. Professional. Impossible to misunderstand. He's expecting an argument, Margaret said. We're sending paperwork. I almost laughed. It was exactly the kind of strategy I had used during contract disputes. People prepare for shouting. Very few prepare for certified mail. 3 days later, the filing was submitted. Then we waited. Waiting is difficult when you've spent months being betrayed. But waiting also forces the other person to keep acting naturally. Daniel had no idea anything had changed. At least not yet. Meanwhile, life continued inside the house. The investigator occasionally drove past. Nothing invasive. Just observations from public roads. The lawn was freshly cut. A new mailbox had been installed. Melissa planted roses near the front porch. Daniel spent Saturday washing the windows. They were improving a house they believed would soon belong entirely to them. Then on Thursday morning, everything shifted. At 9:14 my phone rang. Daniel. I answered. His voice sounded different. Not angry. Confused. Claire. Yes. I received something from an attorney. I imagine you did. A long silence followed. I don't understand. I'm sure you'll read it carefully. Why would you hire a lawyer? Interesting. Not. I'm sorry. Not. We need to talk. His first concern was legal. Not personal. I thought you weren't coming back. There it was. The sentence he never meant for me to hear. I never said that. You stayed away. My mother was dying. I know, but... No, Daniel. I interrupted him gently. You knew where I was every single day. Silence. Then he changed direction. I think someone's filling your head with ideas. I almost smiled. Liars often assume the truth must come from someone else. Because they can't imagine honesty surviving on its own. I'll let our attorneys communicate. Claire. His voice softened. We're still family. Family. The word felt strangely unfamiliar. I have another call waiting. It wasn't true. But neither was his version of our marriage. I ended the conversation. 10 minutes later, Rebecca called. I didn't answer. Melissa called an hour after that. I didn't answer her either. By evening, I had 6 missed calls and 3 voicemail messages. I listened to none of them. Margaret advised me to preserve them unopened. People say interesting things when they think they're speaking into silence. The next morning she called. You'll want to hear this. What happened? The real estate agent withdrew from representing Daniel. Why? He failed to disclose joint ownership accurately. One professional had already stepped away. Not because of accusations. Because of documentation. Truth has a quiet way of making reasonable people protect themselves. The following Monday, another development arrived. The neighborhood association sent an email to every homeowner announcing their annual summer gathering. Normally, I would have ignored it. Margaret didn't. Go. You want me to attend? Absolutely. I haven't spoken to any of them. Exactly. The event was held in the community clubhouse. About 80 people attended every year. Children played outside. Neighbors brought homemade desserts. Someone always overcooked the hamburgers. Ordinary life. I arrived alone. Several conversations stopped almost immediately. Not dramatically. Just long enough for people to notice I was standing there. Mrs. Hernandez from across the street approached first. She looked genuinely surprised. Claire. I smiled. It's good to see you. She hesitated. We thought. I know. Her expression fell. You came back. I never left permanently. She blinked twice. I thought Daniel said. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Within 20 minutes, I had spoken with nearly a dozen neighbors. I never criticized Daniel. Never mentioned Melissa. Never accused anyone of lying. Whenever someone asked what had happened, I answered with the exact same sentence. My mother became terminally ill, so I stayed with her until she passed away. Nothing more. No drama. No embellishment. Just the truth. Something fascinating happened. People began correcting themselves. Though, I didn't realize. That's not what we understood. The story Daniel had carefully built didn't collapse because I attacked it. It collapsed because reality required fewer explanations. About 40 minutes later, the clubhouse doors opened. Daniel walked in. Melissa beside him. Emma a step behind. I watched the exact moment Daniel saw me. He froze. The smile disappeared from his face. Melissa followed his gaze. She stopped walking too. The room became strangely quiet. Not because anyone wanted conflict. Because confusion had entered the room. Daniel crossed toward me. Slowly. Claire. Hello, Daniels. I didn't know you were coming. I received the neighborhood invitation. He looked around. People were watching without pretending otherwise. We should talk privately. I'm comfortable talking here. His jaw tightened. You've embarrassed me. No, I answered softly. The paperwork did that. For a second I thought he might argue. Instead he lowered his voice. You could have warned me. I looked at him carefully. Did you warn me before packing my belongings? He had no answer. Melissa stepped forward. For the first time since all this began, she spoke directly to me. I never wanted to hurt you. Her voice shook. And for the first time, I believed someone. Not because I believed she was innocent. Because regret sounded real. I believed Daniel, she continued quietly. He told me you'd chosen another life. I held her gaze. Did you ever ask me? She looked down. No. That single word echoed louder than any argument could have. Emma stood behind her mother, eyes filling with tears. She whispered something I barely heard. I'm sorry. She wasn't apologizing for moving into the house. She was apologizing for believing a story she had never questioned. And in that moment, I realized something important. Daniel hadn't only stolen my home. He had stolen other people's ability to choose based on the truth. That was the deepest betrayal of all. Just then, the clubhouse doors opened again. A woman in a navy suit stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. She looked around once before walking directly toward me. "Mrs. Thompson." "Yes." She smiled politely. "I'm looking for Daniel Thompson." The room became silent. Daniel slowly turned around. "I'm Daniel." The woman handed him a sealed envelope. "You've been personally served." He stared at it. "What is this?" She answered calmly. "Documentation related to the property dispute and notice regarding temporary restrictions affecting the residents." Then she turned back to me. "Mrs. Thompson." I nodded. She left without another word. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. The only sound inside the clubhouse was the rustle of paper as Daniel slowly opened the envelope. And for the first time since I had watched Melissa unlock my front door, he finally understood that the story he had written for everyone else was no longer the one that mattered. Daniel didn't read the documents immediately. He simply stared at the first page as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less serious. They didn't. I watched his eyes move from one paragraph to the next. Then back again. His shoulders dropped. Not dramatically. Just enough for someone who knew him to notice. Rebecca hurried across the room. "What is it?" Daniel folded the papers before she could read them. "Nothing. Margaret once told me that people reveal the truth by the things they suddenly call nothing. And for years, every disagreement in our marriage had been nothing. Every missing explanation. Every uncomfortable conversation. Every delayed answer. Now the most important legal document he had ever received was suddenly nothing." Rebecca looked at me. Then at Daniel. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't immediately take his side. She simply looked confused. Mrs. Hernandez quietly touched my arm. "I'm sorry." I smiled gently. "You don't owe me an apology." I believed. "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have called you." Maybe she should have. But I wasn't angry with her. Most people don't investigate every story they're told. They trust the people they already know. Daniel had counted on that. The gathering ended earlier than usual. Families packed up leftovers. Children chased each other across the lawn, completely unaware that several adults had just realized they had misunderstood months of someone else's life. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. "Emma." She stopped a few feet away. "Claire." I turned. She looked older than 16. Not physically. Emotionally. "I found one of your photo albums in the attic." I waited. I asked Dad why it was up there. "And he said you didn't want it anymore." She swallowed hard. I believed him. I nodded. "I know." She opened her backpack and carefully removed the album. I brought it. I accepted it with both hands. It wasn't just photographs. Tucked between the pages was a Mother's Day card she had made for me 2 years earlier. On the front she had written, "Thank you for always making me feel welcome." I remembered crying when she gave it to me. Now she was crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. I gently closed the album. "You don't have to choose between your parents, Emma." She looked surprised. "I'll always want you to love your father." Even after everything, that remained true. Children shouldn't inherit adult wars. She nodded silently before walking away. That small conversation hurt more than any legal document ever could. The following week brought another unexpected development. Daniel's attorney requested a meeting. Margaret agreed. We met in a conference room with polished wooden walls and a long oval table. Daniel looked exhausted. Melissa wasn't there. Neither was Rebecca. Only the attorneys and the two of us. For several minutes no one spoke. Then Daniel finally looked at me. I made mistakes. Margaret remained expressionless. I did too. I never meant for things to go this far. I answered quietly. They didn't. He frowned. What? They went exactly as far as your decisions took them. Silence. His attorney cleared his throat. My client would like to discuss a settlement. Margaret nodded politely. We're listening. Daniel pushed a folder across the table. He offered to buy my share of the house. At far below market value. Margaret didn't even touch the folder. No. Daniel looked frustrated. Can we at least discuss it? Margaret finally opened the file. She read the first page. Closed it. Then looked directly at him. Mr. Thompson, you've based this offer on the assumption that Mrs. Thompson voluntarily abandoned the property. He said nothing. That assumption is not supported by the available evidence. Again, silence. His attorney slowly removed his glasses. I could almost see him recalculating the case in his mind. For the next 2 hours, the conversation remained calm. No shouting. No accusations. Just documents. Dates. Emails. Records. Every time Daniel claimed something, Margaret quietly produced another piece of paper. Phone records showing our daily conversations while I cared for my mother. Medical records confirming where I had been. Property filings. The rejected trust document. The occupancy agreement. The attempted listing. Each document was ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a story that required no dramatic speeches. Eventually Daniel stopped arguing. Not because someone humiliated him. Because there was nothing left to contradict. When the meeting ended, his attorney asked for a private conversation with him. Margaret and I stepped into the hallway. She looked at me. How are you feeling? I thought carefully. Lighter. Not happy. No. She smiled faintly. That's probably healthier. 3 weeks later, the agreement was finalized. The house would be sold. Not secretly. Not unfairly. Sold legally. After expenses, each of us would receive exactly what we were entitled to. Nothing more. Nothing less. Melissa moved into a rental apartment with Emma before the sale closed. Daniel rented a small townhouse across town. The family he had tried so hard to recreate no longer lived under one roof. Not because anyone forced them apart. Because relationships built on unfinished truths rarely survive the pressure of complete honesty. 6 months after everything ended, I attended the closing. The buyer was a young couple expecting their first child. They walked through every room smiling, planning where the nursery would go, arguing playfully about paint colors. I wished them well. As I handed over my keys, I didn't feel like I was losing a home. I felt like I was finally leaving a story that had already ended long before I understood it. A year later, I bought a smaller cottage near the lake. Only 2 bedrooms. A wide front porch. A tiny vegetable garden. No unnecessary space. No unnecessary noise. One afternoon, I found my father's old toolbox in the garage. The same rusted box he had handed me when I was 11. Inside, every tool still rested exactly where he had left it. I remembered what he had said. The one that lasts is. For years, I thought he was talking about tools. He wasn't. He was talking about character. Character lasts. Truth lasts. Patience lasts. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth simply waits. Sometimes people ask whether I regret staying so calm. Whether I wish I had confronted Daniel the day I saw Melissa walk into my house. I always give the same answer. No, because shouting would only have created another story. The documents told the real one. This was never just about one marriage, or one house, or one betrayal. It was about a system of small lies that slowly replaced reality until everyone accepted them without asking questions. That system didn't collapse because I spoke louder. It collapsed because facts remained patient. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. When someone works very hard to rewrite your life, don't waste all your energy arguing with their version. Protect the truth. Record the facts. Let time expose what emotion cannot. The truth rarely arrives first. But when it finally does, it doesn't need to raise its voice. Before I go, tell me in the comments. What was the first tiny detail that made you realize Daniel's story was falling apart? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories. I'll see you in the next one.